Morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's great to see people logging in from all over the world. Keep telling us in the chat where you're dialing in from. It's great to see. It's very exciting to be here for the latest in our Innovation at Work webinar series from MIT Sloan Executive Education, where today I am joined by two of our esteemed faculty colleagues, John Davis, who is the Faculty Director of Family Enterprise Programs at the MIT Sloan School of Management, and Jason Jay, who is a senior lecturer and director of the Sustainability Initiative, also at the MIT Sloan School of Management. Both John and Jason are prolific teachers, not only across the school and in the world, but in particular in our executive education programs, and leaders in their respective fields with really global renown as well. And I'm very, very pleased that we have both of them today to be able to share their perspectives on this important topic. And so the format today is that we'll start by welcoming John, and he will provide some remarks from his perspective, and then he'll hand over to Jason, who will add to that. And I will come back later on and facilitate them answering any questions that might have occurred to you or any comments that you would like to share with the team from hearing these presentations. So as Elaine did mention, please do feel free to add any ongoing thoughts and comments that you have in the chat. But if you'd like to ask a question for me to put to Jason and John later on in the presentation, please do put that in the Q&A. That makes it more likely that we will see and be able to respond in real time to your questions. So today we're going to cover these important questions: why family enterprises need to pivot their value creation strategies, given the very not only turbulent, but I would suggest just a rapidly changing, driven by technology and other factors, environment for business and in society more generally. How are families in particular putting these two strategies to build value together? And that is an owner strategy and this concept of systemic investing, which I'm looking forward to learning a lot more about both of those things. How can a family business make use of these strategies in order to secure the future for the long term of your own businesses? And in the course of doing that, we're going to hear about the latest research and thinking about both family enterprise and systemic invention. So this is really a treat. Thank you, John and Jason, for being here to share your work with us. And let me mute myself and hand the stage over to John.
Peter, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity, not only to explain what's going on at MIT, represented in the background here, but and to be able to share this discussion with my colleague Jason Jay, and to have an opportunity to also explain how we're trying to help families navigate in this new era that we've entered at MIT's Future Family Enterprise program. We'll get to all of that in this hour. And let me start here. I've been fortunate to have, over the past 40 plus years, not only had the opportunity to think as an academic and teach and research on this interesting question of long-term family enterprise success, but to work with families all over the globe who are dealing with real-time, real-world issues that affect their long-term success, and helping them, watching them navigate, create solutions that will allow them to take another step or some big steps forward to perpetuate the success that they have. I'm going to walk you through some of my reasoning, our reasoning, about how families manage to get from one generation into another and to perpetuate, indeed, accelerate their success. And it starts here it starts with understanding that to be successful long term as a family, and I think this applies to any kind of organization, you must be building value. Well, and when I say that, our minds usually go to financial value, and that's true. Other types of value as well, I'll come to that. But financial value is important to build over time. Why? Because costs are growing. It is true, if you get larger and more efficient, on average, your operational costs can decline, but in total, costs grow in any family enterprise system, indeed in any system. So if you're not growing value, including and importantly, financial value beyond how much your costs are growing, you sink. The arithmetic of long-term success is clear. So value creation is essential in the mission and in the activities, the actions of owning families and their organizations. They must be growing value over time. To do that, to build value over time, we've got two topics that explain some of our latest thinking about what enterprising families can and should be doing, how they should be thinking, at least, about this important topic. And we know that value creation can and needs to include all types of value. I'm listing some of the important ones here, but all of these, not just financial value, are important for owners of enterprises to be thinking about, because you're ultimately accountable if your organization, if your enterprise is building value. And when we say enterprise, family enterprise, we're really talking about the aggregation of the family's important assets and activities. And in gold there, you see the major types of family enterprise assets. At the top of the what I call a flower petal diagram, you have the family company, typically, almost always, the largest asset that the family owns, the asset that gets understandably the most attention, but there are other assets a family can own, including non-core businesses, typically a real estate portfolio, but it could be other types of ventures that the family has, doesn't consider core, but are certainly relevant to a family's portfolio. And then, of course, the liquid assets that are hopefully managed in a very effective and efficient way. But also there are family assets on the opposite corner: homes, art, boats, properties that the family has that can be quite financially valuable, but also have some sentimental value. And then, of course, activities like philanthropy and social impact activities. This is Jason's domain, and one that we know is very important to a family, not only for reputation reasons, but also to build unity and engagement on the part of the family to what the family does. And that spills into family community activities. A family may sit on the board of a school or a hospital. It's not theirs, but they are connected to it. It's part of what the family does. And then, of course, the family's activities: family unity, family life, family talent building. These typically define pretty comprehensively the portfolio that a family needs to think about, act to build value in all of these ways, driven by its sense of mission, its important values, its vision, hopefully a compelling vision that keeps the family engaged, supportive, contributing in various ways. Over time, and I have looked at family companies, broader family enterprise over the last, let's say, couple of centuries pretty carefully. What you have seen is that in the business, in other ways, in the enterprise, you have to continuously innovate. You have to continuously strive to be not only effective, but efficient in operations. So-called operational excellence has always been important for long-term success, but it's necessary but not sufficient. In fact, what you find is that the families that do last tend to be not only operationally effective, but they make the important ownership decisions that come to them, that appear in their environment, that appear internally on time. And it's the families that have done that have been really good at the ownership level decisions that they've made. Should we expand into the next territory? Should we diversify into another type of business? Should we make this technological investment to transform how we do things? Who do we select to be in the leadership group? Who do we put on boards? All of these are owner level decisions. And the families that have made those promptly and correctly have tended to survive. Those that don't, despite how good they are operationally, tend not to. So when we explain to our participants, to my MBA students, to others, what then do we need to do as a family in order to be on a path, on a trajectory that stays successful? Well, first, you need the right portfolio of assets and activities. Are we in the right operating businesses? Do we have enough liquid assets that help us stabilize the family and allow us to treat our companies more aggressively? Do we have the right portfolio, including philanthropy, including family activities? It's all important. Refer back to that family enterprise example or model. Second, we all know that the right organization, good management of anything that we're doing is important, necessary for success. That's the operating part of the formula. But good ownership is, as I explained earlier, really definitive. You develop a good group of owners who support their company and other activities, good owners who can agree, maybe with some debate, but eventually agree on a way forward, agree on what we're trying to accomplish. And they don't take too much from the company in terms of jobs that they don't qualify for or funds that they don't deserve, that the company really needs for growth. If you have a group of owners that can do that, it supports your organization. It helps you in this quest, which is presented with challenges, quest for long-term success, which is presented with challenges all the time. And then finally, the base foundation here is a family that gets along pretty well, supports its enterprise, is aligned on the key values that are needed to keep not only the family healthy and successful, but support the economic and other activities that the family has. Now, in our program, in our work, we explain that, number one, there are different types of owners. And not all owners will be active owners. These are the people that know what the family owns, understand its business and the industry that the business is in, and can weigh in on important directional decisions that need to be made. Now, some of these decisions can be allocated or delegated to your board. Everyone needs good advisors to help make decisions. But the point here is that if you're the owner of an enterprise, you're accountable to make sure that these 5 types of decisions are being made well and on time. Preparing a strategic vision. Where are we going in terms of our business and other activities? What investment should we make? Should we diversify? Should we invest in that technology? Should we become more geographically diffused in our operations? Who are the key people that we need? Are they in place? Family and non-family. Do we have the right culture? Do we have the right governance system? This captures the accountabilities of owners. And what we're seeing today in the new environment that we have clearly entered, we entered this at about 2017. You're finding all kinds of decisions that are floating up to the owner level that need to be made. And this is a short list of some key decisions that owners need to be paying attention to and ready to decide on so that they can keep momentum building in the right ways. And in our work, we know that these 4 big factors are driving much of what we're seeing in society, in business, and also in families. And we are tracking how the world is changing in these various ways, how different forces of change are interacting and creating trends around technology, around supply chains and geographic issues, around talent issues, and also in our family and generationally, how things are changing. We have a way of thinking about the changes that we're facing and to help families think about how to get ready. And the biggest, if you're going to take something away from what I've just said, the biggest conclusion we've reached is that owning families need to have an owner mindset. They need to think like owners in the various ways I've been describing, even though, and unfortunately, most owning families still think like operators. We need to help families step up. Some members have to step up to be able to think like owners and develop what we're calling an owner strategy, which looks at the entire portfolio of what we're trying to accomplish, our entire enterprise, and thinks about what returns do we need? Where do we need to grow value? How should we grow value? How do we deal with the risks in our family, in our business, in our industry, in the broader environment that we're in, including country risks, which have never, in my 40-some years, been as high as they are today. So an owner strategy, but that's not all. And Jason, let me now first of all, any comments, Jason, on
Yeah.
what I've just talked about before we turn over to you?
Well, first of all, I just want to point just that, there's been some chatter in the chat, and some questions starting to pop up, that are kind of about the scope conditions for what we're talking about here in terms of the size of families, in terms of the generational transitions. And what I said in response to that is that there's quite a range in the conversations that we're part of, a range from first to second gen transition all the way to sixth to seventh generation, right? Siblings to cousins to distant cousins. And that there's also, I would say, an important range in terms of the degree of liquidity. So there's some families which are really heavily bound up in their core business, with kind of liquid assets on the margins. And there are some who have had a major exit or liquidity event, and therefore have established something like a family office in the way that folks are defining here in the chat. And so I think the key is a more qualitative sense, in terms of the scoping, that flower petal diagram you showed. If there's a good population of those activities going on in a family, and some hope that those will transition forward to the next generation, and some concern about whether they will or not, that's kind of what defines the scope for these things. Is that, but I thought, John, is there anything more that you would say in terms of that? I said we don't say numbers, and when sort of set thresholds in terms of turnover or AUM,
Right.
like that.
No, I think, thank you for that, Jason. And the families we see in the Future Family Enterprise Program, the families that we advise out there all over the globe, do come in all kinds of forms. And the object is to architect that family enterprise properly, to get the right portfolio of businesses, other kinds of assets, other kinds of activities, to help long-term success, which we know is different than short-term success. And in the family enterprise world, if you're not developing assets and activities that engage the family, at least some of them, and help motivate people to participate, contribute, get good at various jobs within that enterprise, some of the businesses that you own may succeed, but probably not with your family.
Right.
Family enterprise is different.
Yeah.
So let me pause there.
Yeah. No, great.
And ask you to now
Sure.
take over.
Yeah. No, I excited to do it. And I'm just gonna pop over to my screen share. Is that working okay, John? You see that?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So what I'm going to talk about is sort of an emerging topic of innovation in this whole space of family enterprise and family offices, and it's what we call systemic investing. So I'm going to start by giving a couple of examples, and then talk about how this field, this conversation is evolving, and how it might be of relevance to families that you all touch. So I'll start with an example in the context of India. So my wife is from Calcutta, spent a lot of time there, and have gotten to encounter some of this context and business directly. But you have some big health challenges in India as it grows and it enters into this new phase of its development as a nation. The rise of non-communicable diseases, so think heart disease, cancers, are now 60% of deaths, whereas before they were 38% of deaths. So these are kind of diseases of affluence starting to rise, while we still also have all of the waterborne pathogens and other issues that we face in emerging markets. You have disparities and in access and quality, where most of healthcare is offered through private companies. COVID was a tsunami in India. We lost family members, and there were, at the peak, it was 400,000 cases a day, 4,000 deaths a day. In this context, there is a family enterprise called the Apollo Hospitals, that's run by the Reddy family, Dr. Pratap Reddy and his 4 daughters. all of whom are trained physicians, but who run different facets of this family enterprise. And what's interesting about their constellation of activity is that they have a mission statement as a family, as an extended family enterprise, which is to bring healthcare of international standards within the reach of every individual, and to develop the research and knowledge that provides the backbone for that. And there's a whole suite of activities. So they use what we call a polycapital approach, meaning that they have the company, which is Apollo Hospitals, which is the premier chain of private hospitals in India. But then they use venture investing to invest in new technologies like telemedicine. They do philanthropic work to help create last mile clinic offerings. They use political capital to engage with the government to help drive expansion of national health programs and other infrastructures that help to extend that access. And they have built a number of different organizations and companies, the non-core businesses in John's parlance, that are adjacencies to Apollo, and which have helped to extend this mission. And that is a synergistic set of activities. So the idea here of systemic, the reason we call this systemic investing is this idea of we're looking at a systems challenge in the healthcare, and we're looking at what are the different ways that we as a family can participate in shifting that system, and in the process building a really healthy set of enterprise activities. I'll give another example here in the US. Another systems challenge. This is actually kind of on a global level. About 40% of the food that humans grow is wasted somewhere along the value chain, sometimes in loss in the agricultural space or in transit. Sometimes it's the smelly stuff in the back of your refrigerator. But this is a challenge that Betsy and Jesse Fink came to understand in their family enterprise context. So Jesse had been the founding COO of Priceline, exited the company, built a family office and foundation and a family farm as a family enterprise, Betsy and Jesse together. And in the course of having a farm, they encountered this food waste challenge very directly. And they said, oh, this is crazy, that so much of what we grow isn't ending up making it to the market. What's going on here? And so what they started doing was convening people under a literal tent on their farm to talk about the food waste challenge. And they got entrepreneurs and farmers and food companies and policymakers and advocates and NGOs in discussion about how do we think about this systems challenge. And what they started to do was some capital deployment that was informed by this experience of these conversations. They started philanthropically funding nonprofits that were doing food recovery and doing research on the topic of food waste. They funded a report by the NRDC, which is a major NGO, to raise attention to the topic of food waste and helped make it part of a national conversation. They started investing in startup companies that were deploying food waste solutions to incumbent companies. And then they ended up building a backbone organization called ReFed, which coordinates efforts and investments around the topic of food waste. And that has led to creating sort of visibility into the data of how food waste is changing, where capital is flowing into different kinds of solutions, and then spinning up new funds and investor communities that are tackling this systems challenge. So they've built a whole ecosystem of organizations and companies that are working in this terrain. And what's really interesting is that for the 5 million or so that they invested in these different kinds of solutions, they've now catalyzed more than $1 to $2 billion per year of funding that's going into food waste solutions, largely in kind of private market type investments through these coalitions of other investors. If you're curious to learn more about it, we just released a case study that we published with kind of a detailed narrative about this. as an example of systemic investing. And I just, for those of you who are looking in the chat, you can see. So I give these two examples around food and around healthcare because these are two of the big systemic challenges that we face. And they're two of a whole suite of issues. This is a picture that comes from a book called Donut Economics, which is a great window onto some of the challenges that John described earlier when he said, we've got environmental degradation, ecological disruption, and social political forces. These are all the sort of changing context of business. This is a sort of map of the systemic issues that we face. But in solving these challenges creates major opportunities for impact, but also for new value creation. So I was inspired by these examples like the Reddys and the Finks, and we started looking more systematically for other examples of where people are investing for systems change and looking to create whole ensembles of economic activity as a result. And we helped to create a network called Together We Invest for Systemic Transformation, or TWIST, where there's been now 36 case studies of investing for systems change that have come through this learning community. And my master's student, Alvin Yao, just recently completed his thesis doing a comparative analysis of the first 26 of these case studies, which is pretty exciting. It's the first empirical work on systemic investing. And what we said, I just pasted into the chat what's also this QR code, which is Alvin's research on this. And one of the things that we noticed is that when people take a systemic approach, they define the system, the boundaries of the system, in terms of the issue and the geography. So there's some efforts that are more issue specific, like they're looking at food waste at the national scale. So that, like the refed example I just gave. Some of them are much more place-based, and a lot of times with family enterprises, there's specific places that people care about and will dig into to try to improve. In some of the cases, they're more general with respect to issues, but place-based. So there's an effort called Regen Melbourne in Australia, for example, which is doing a whole suite of different interventions to make Melbourne a sustainable, regenerative, and equitable economy, and in the process create a number of really interesting businesses. So that's an issue general, place specific kind of thing. So we're seeing a big array of approaches here, and there's now kind of starting to be critical mass around this topic. So last week we convened the inaugural Systemic Investing Summit. We had 150 people from family offices, institutional investors, foundations, social innovators, and academia from all around the world to MIT to hash out, okay, what do these strategies look like? And what does it mean to do investing where you're investing across asset classes? You're using equity, debt, and other financial instruments, plus philanthropy and political engagement in this sort of polycapital approach in order to create synergy between those investments so that they add up to much more than the sum of their parts, both in terms of impact and in terms of the scale of economic activity and value that you can create. So this is a nascent field, it's a nascent topic. What's emerged so far are essentially a couple of principles that we've seen as people have taken on this type of work. So the first is this idea of a new investment logic. So a lot of times when you're thinking about investment in modern portfolio theory and contemporary finance, the main logic is we're trying to diversify in order to mitigate risk. And here the logic is, instead of mitigating risk, we're trying to enhance value through synergy, which means looking at multiple different interventions and investments in a similar terrain, but thereby creating much more value. So if we think about, the people who have built really significant wealth, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Gates, Zuckerberg, Musk, et cetera, it's not just that they're creating companies, they're creating whole industries. And so how do you do that? How do you dovetail a number of things together to enhance value? The second is this idea of the polycapital approach, which I described before, which is combining all these different capabilities that families have, and not just families. Systemic investing is a concept that transcends families. Large, government investors, institutional asset owners can employ these ideas and these approaches. But one of the things that we've seen is that family enterprises and family offices have a really unique role to play because they have the flexibility of capital allocation. They have the long-term time horizon. They have the social and political embeddedness in the cities or countries that they're trying to affect. And they're able to therefore kind of coordinate these things together. Several of the people that we've talked to in this field have even used terms like spiritual capital to identify the idea of the kind of both the sort of moral authority that some families hold when they've been philanthropic over periods of time, when they have clear intentions, and also, kind of being organized around values and vision and mission, the way that John described before. System understanding is a key part of this, being able to use mapping of the value chain, mapping of the stakeholders, mapping of the causal forces, mapping of the mental models at play to really understand how the system works and what it would look like to change or create a new system regime. This is part of why we at MIT Sloan are so excited about this topic, because we're the birthplace of system dynamics, which is a key mapping and modeling methodology that's applicable in these contexts. And then nesting and collaboration. So a lot of times what you see, so for example, in the food waste example, the Fink family was one family that was sort of getting things off the ground, but the success there has to do with having brought other families to the table to be part of the Refed Investor Council, to be co-investing in new funds and new enterprises, so that there's an ensemble of investors investing in an ensemble of activities that together tackle a major challenge. And that's a kind of common sort of principle or trend that we're starting to see as this practice unfolds. Paolo asked a question in the chat just about what does this have to do with the family business? And that's actually one of the research questions that we're leaning into, which is quite interesting, because in some of these cases, and in fact, the two examples I gave are trying to show sort of one which is relatively more financially driven, although informed by the fact that they own a farm, and one that has an operating company really at the center of things, where Apollo Hospitals and their having a major stake in the healthcare system of every major city in India creates the home base and anchor point for a lot of these other ancillary activities. But how families use the full suite of capabilities around the sort of flower model that John showed earlier, that's one of the key ideas and one of the key investigations that we have, is how families can best make use of this full array of capabilities when they're doing an approach to systemic investing.
Jason, I wonder if I could just add a couple of thoughts to this really interesting new theme that you're pioneering here. One is that it gives us another good example of how family enterprise can be not only adaptive and more adaptive than many other types of capitalist organizations, but also how it demonstrates that the family enterprise model is superior in some ways. We know, for example, that family companies on average perform better than non-family companies.
Mhm.
Comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges, that it's been done now for years, this research. We know that family businesses are operationally more innovative
Mhm.
than non-family businesses. We know that family businesses value and nurture stakeholder relationships on average better. And you're adding to this this understanding
Mhm.
that family businesses with the right mindset, really thinking about the system that they're in,
Yeah.
and we know for sure that partnering, being comfortable and good at partnering, is going to be a requirement for success in the future. You
Yeah.
can't do it on your own. You
Yeah.
don't know enough, you don't have enough capital, you don't have enough access, whatever. Partnering is going to be essential.
Yeah. Yeah.
And-
I agree with you. And I think, again, the flexibility of capital deployment is also a critical, thing
Yeah.
for families. Um, the only caveat I would say is that families do use polycapital, right? They use their political influence, they use their social networks, they deploy
Yeah.
investment, but it's often in service of preservation of the incumbent technology, preservation of the incumbent business, and a kind of conservative force. And
Yeah.
that is healthy until it's not, right?
Right.
That's healthy until we get to a place where exogenous, forces, whether that's the ecological disruption of climate change and the policy responses to it, or artificial
Technological
intelligence,
change, whatever.
and it's right, AI and its shift in the workforce, and the relative capabilities, major demographic shifts in the preferences for the products that we sell, and in those moments of disruption, you have to mobilize these capabilities toward creating something new and creating a new socio-technical kind of regime, to be wonky about it, but a new set of businesses and technologies that can even self-disrupt and replace. And I think that mindset piece that you mentioned includes like, again, some facets of this are already in the highly embedded, socially embedded family enterprise mindset. But I think this perspective asks you to think about the wider system shifts that are occurring, the new industry creation opportunities, and the more disruptive work that might be possible that the families can use their capabilities to support.
Yeah, excellent.
Do you want to move on to the next part of the conversation here, John?
I do, and I will I'm going to scroll, sorry, Jason, through your interesting slides, and always learn so much when I'm teaching with you. The program that we have, Future Family Enterprise, it's designed for teams of family members. Typically 4 or more come to the program from an enterprising family. It can include a non-family board member or advisor, executive, for example, on the family team. But this is really a program designed for families, and you spend 6 days with us on campus. And I'll show you the basic curriculum in a minute. In the classroom, engaged in case discussions and very interactive lecture discussions, really exploring the essentials of family enterprise success, especially in the new environment that we're in today. And it gives families an opportunity to not only learn together and talk together about these big issues, but every day a family retires into a private conference room with a facilitator coach that I've selected, and you talk about your agenda, so that by the end of the program, you've not only ingested all of this new thinking and worthwhile conversations, but you have an action plan to take back to your family. MIT was founded on this notion of mens manus, mind and hand. Think and then use. Make it practical, make it usable. And we do that with a passion in this program. And the families that go through it often call it transformational, but at least say this was an incredibly valuable investment of time and some money, but the time is really the investment here. And we've had conversations about our future that we've never had before. So the program, think of it as an action learning program where you're gonna be in a different place when you exit the program on Friday afternoon. And the amount of learning and conversations are achieved by all of these different methods. And when you think about it, the ability to have important conversations about us and our future, and to leave with some concrete actions to help us get there it's an impressive level of teamwork and effectiveness that allows this program to really turn out those kinds of results. So we hope we see you for this multi-day experience. We touch on not all, but virtually all of the major types of topics that you'd want to think about, talk about in general and with your family. And the intellectual, the social, the innovative benefits of these kinds of conversations that are woven around this topic are, I guarantee you, something that you will benefit from. We hope to see many of you in our program, and we offer it twice a year now. In the spring, we avoid the winter months in Boston for obvious reasons, but spring and also fall, two lovely times to be on the MIT campus. And just being on the MIT campus, you will find it to be an amazing place. We're centered at Kendall Square, which has become known as I don't know if this is good marketing, but it sounds true to me, the most innovative square mile on the planet. And when you think about everything that is happening at MIT today, the changes that are being invented in our labs and centers, and you'll be excited to be there. So, Peter, I think we're back to you, and hope we have some questions that Jason and I can address.
Great, thank you both very much. Yes, there's been some good discussion and questions coming. You both addressed a number of them, I think, just in your planned remarks, or also being very responsive. So thank you for that. But just watching, one of the themes that I saw people talking about there was, maybe I'll try to put a few into one. I describe it maybe as a question of focus. Jason, you put up a slide showing here's a menu of different systemic issues that people could potentially choose from. But there was one question about how important, from the examples that you've seen so far, has it been for, or how valuable has it been for a family to be focusing its systemic energies on something that their business is related to, or that they know something about, versus alternatively taking perhaps their very considerable resources and looking for what's the place that we can have the biggest impact.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question. And this question about focus is one of the major kind of research questions that are driving our work in this space. Because some degree of concentrated effort and durable concentrated effort is required to be able to make systems change, right? And so that means some degree of focus. At the same time, families are complicated, right? Especially in a multi-generational family, you have a variety of different interests that people have in different issues, in different geographies, in different technologies. And so there's the more people that you successfully engage in the family, which is part of the goal, right? With family enterprise work, the greater variety of agendas come into the room. And there's kind of a centrifugal force from having focus. So there's a dance there, and in some situations where it's a relatively simple context, like a couple, they can define an arena and go after it in a very narrow sense. But even in complicated kind of cousin stage, third, fourth generation families with a lot of players, there's a degree of focus that can happen as a result of getting clear about the family's competencies and capabilities and its legacy. So, for example, there's a family that we've worked with, which they had built a lot of wealth in the oil and gas business, and that had two connotations actually. One was that they were becoming present to the energy transition and the climate impacts of their historical business. And they became very dedicated to investing in renewable energy and alternative energy technologies as a way to hedge against and diversify, as well as to mitigate and repair some of the damage that they had done. And then there was also a recognition that the oil was discovered on agricultural land that the family had owned, which meant that they were also had sort of roots in the land and farming and had been slave owners. So the topic of racial justice, the topic of regenerative agriculture and doing new ways of farming better and agricultural innovation and renewable energy and climate solutions in the energy space became three themes that really had some deep focus. And Juan Ribeiro asked the question, like, what do we mean by spiritual capital? Well, part of that spiritual capital is the commitment to a set of values, to a mission, to a sense of purpose, which is sometimes about getting clear about that legacy of the family and working to transform it and being seen as serious in its transformation is part of what interestingly builds some of the trust and social capital and reputation and support that allow for these collaborative endeavors to happen. But it's a very astute question from those who had raised it, because again, there is a centrifugal force of different interests, and there's also the idea that we should diversify so that we're not overly concentrated in one sector or industry. But the systemic approach is all about enhancing value through synergy, which does mean a degree of focus. So the balance there for any one family or family office is part of what we're going to be helping people cultivate as we do work around this terrain.
Thank you. And John, do you have anything to add to that? It was a pretty strong.
Oh, yeah, but just briefly, that for the most part, in most cases, the biggest social impact that an enterprising family can have is usually around its operating businesses. Things that it knows a lot about, has a big investment in. And if we can take an issue that relates to our company and do a better job, we can often get economic benefits from doing it, reputational benefits from doing it, but also engagement benefits from doing it. It can be a big win. One of the, it's not a surprise. I think everybody in this webinar would recognize that the two generations today, or sometimes three, have been thinking differently about the obligations of the family to the world. and the engagement of getting that next generation more engaged through the mission of the family that speaks to how we can do things better, make things better, and be proud of what we're doing as a family. Very important strategic element in the thinking of owners. And so what Jason is pointing out here is the same thing, that if you pay attention to the things you are doing today and find a way to do it better, make it better, you can often check a lot of boxes needed for long-term success, is where I would go with this.
Right, thank you. Noting that we have about 4 minutes of time left, can I perhaps suggest two themes to you and divide the time as you see fit between them? One would be building very much on, I think, what you just were both talking about, and that we had a question about, so how should families think about measuring impact? They're doing all these with the best intentions. What are actually some of the measures of impact that they should be thinking about? And there was another set of themes, which is not new, John. When we've done these webinars before, people are always asking about what's the role of non-family members, and what's the sort of the trust dynamic between the families and kind of the professional managers and advisors that they rely on. And so we're just wondering whether there's any further advice about how to work with or relate to non-family members in the context of the systemic investing idea for families. So either of you have any thoughts about those two?
I'll take the second, Jason, if you'll take the first. Measures of impact.
Yeah, okay. So on measures of impact, I think this is one of the really hot areas of inquiry in this area. If you are, if you're doing philanthropy, kind of traditional philanthropy, and you're setting up a training facility for people coming out of prison, or for women coming back to the workforce after parenting, you can develop these sort of impact measurement models that are pretty kind of operational, right? It's like, how many hours of training are we giving them for, what kind of career outcomes? And you can sort of define a machine. When people work on systems change, which is the kind of basis of the systemic investing idea, it gets much more complicated, because often what you're trying to do is you're trying to change the whole context around that, let's say, that same population. So maybe you're working on changes to the rules of the game in a political campaign about what are the background checks that people have to go through after being in prison. Or let's say that you're working on, similarly if you're working in energy, you could measure like how many gigawatts of renewable energy we're putting in the ground and how much greenhouse gases does that mitigate. But if you're working on systems change, that's a component of what you're doing, but you're also working on, maybe working toward a price on carbon, which would change the economics of the whole industry and create a lot more value for it. And in those efforts, the intermediate measures of impact are often about the kind of social network that you're building, the amount of other capital that you're crowding in, the number of people and the quality of people that you're getting involved in the space. So when you're doing ecosystem building and systems change work, often the traditional ways of measuring impact actually fall apart. And so this is an area of really active research and inquiry in the space, is how, when you're trying to have a big long-term impact, can you be looking at a mix of kind of the concrete operational type measures, as well as these kind of indicators of systemic transformation.
Yeah, and I would add, on the topic of non-family managers, one of the accountabilities of active owners is to make sure we've got the right talent, family and non-family, in the right places. The family needs to understand generation to generation, and it does change often, where they need to go, what roles they need to occupy, and what roles they shouldn't occupy. And in both cases, both categories, to find the best talent they can find to create value, move things along. And the idea of partnering here is also relevant, Peter, because and it may not be through actual ownership, but there needs to be a sense of partnering between the family and the non-family executives and employees. There needs to be a sense that we're in this together and that we need each other. And we're going to develop a team with non-family to really get this job done and done well and done in a way that we can all be proud of it. So at a high level, the families that are successful get this point. They understand the need to partner. They understand the need to put family, qualified family in the right places and qualified non-family in the right places. And to build a workplace that everybody can be really proud of and attracts talent. So yeah, it's a big issue.
Great. Well, thank you. On that note about talent and collaboration, that seems like a place that we should draw to a close for today. But as you can all still see on your screen, and John gave a great description of his Family Enterprise Executive Education Program with Jason upcoming. Next run in April, and then in October would be a fabulous chance for people who would like to really dig deeper into these topics with Jason, John, and a number of other faculty and experts to hopefully come and join us at MIT for those. But with that, it just remains for me to thank you all for watching and participating actively in the discussion. Thank you again, John and Jason, for bringing your experience and expertise. And we'll look forward to seeing people here at MIT and online in future webinars to come. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.